Hi guys. So because yesterday we ran out of time a little bit, and because I know that some of the key terms that are going to be on your assignment this week, we didn't really get a chance to go over. I wanted to just record this very quickly to give you a little bit of that extra background that we were talking about, the historical context of some of the stuff that's going to be coming up. And in particular, I basically just want to do a very quick breakdown of the early Cold War. And where I'm going to start is the way that the United States comes out of World War II in 1945 is as the major power in the world, alongside the Soviet Union. But Britain and France, the other two major powers going into this, the other two Western allies of real import, have been devastated by World War II. First of all, Britain has been devastated economically. It has lost a lot of its significant financial power that it had before the war. It is heavily in debt to the United States. Secondly, France has lost a lot of territory, and it has obviously been devastated by all the fighting taking place in France during World War II. So coming out of 1945, the United States has been working with the other allies to build what it refers to as the global rules-based order. We're going to talk about this a little bit in the coming weeks. We're going to talk about the Bretton Woods Agreement. We're going to talk about the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, sometimes called GATT. We're going to talk about the origins of the United Nations and the World Bank, things like these. So the thing that you really need to know now is that these are the construction of American political leaders who are anxious to make sure that the United States is locked in, not just as a participant, but as a leader in the global world after World War II. The dollar is going to be the main currency. The United States is going to be at the head of many of these organizations. And as a result, we can talk about the idea that post World War II, the United States is not going to retreat to isolationism in the way that it did after World War I. Remember, isolationism is the idea of avoiding entangling alliances. It's what we would refer to today maybe as something like America First. It's the idea that the United States should not be involved in the world's problems. Um, After World War I, it particularly led to a rejection of the idea of the League of Nations, of American participation in that, in part due to a worry that this was going to lead to future conflicts. So why didn't the US return to isolationism? Well, that's the question that I would like you guys to think about. And if you pause the video here, you can maybe try and come up with those three reasons. But then I'm going to actually give you the answer. So here it is. I think that three of the reasons, and there are more than just three, but I think there's the big one is economics. We've recognized after the Wall Street crash that there is a global economy and that we are at the very center of it. So we have a real incentive to continue to be engaged in trade, in making sure that the economic system is one that we benefit from and that we really like. The second one, and maybe this is a bit more nebulous, is moral. There is a real sense amongst American leaders that we made a big mistake after World War I in not being engaged in the League of Nations, and that this partially led to emboldening fascist and imperialist regimes like Hitler's, like Mussolini's, and like Emperor Hirohito's, that those were essentially given free rein by the fact that the United States was not involved in world affairs. And the big thing there is that coming out of World War II, the Holocaust is seen as something that we maybe had some culpability for. That if we had been more engaged, maybe Hitler wouldn't have been able to get away with the Holocaust. Maybe it could have been stopped before the annihilation of so many people. And so there is this kind of like moral, theological, spiritual sense that we have some kind of role to play in the world after World War II. The third big one, however, that I'm going to highlight, and the one that is going to set the scene for all of the coming decades, is a fear of communism. And that is largely going to come about thanks to two people. The first is a guy called George Kennan. who is going to write something called the Long Telegram. Basically, in the Long Telegram, he is going to send a note from Moscow, where he is a diplomat, to Washington saying that the Soviet Union is intrinsically, like at its very core, an expansionist regime. That it is looking to destroy capitalism. It is going to try and overthrow the United States, and it cannot simply be like regarded as an ally, as like kind of someone um, that like kind of we used to have a normal relationship with. And so because of that, that is going to change foreign policy going forward. The second person who's really critical to this, though, is Truman. Harry Truman obviously only becomes president because Roosevelt dies. He doesn't know a lot of what has been going on under Roosevelt. He doesn't know about the development of atomic bombs. He is the one who ultimately makes the decision to use them at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We will talk when we talk about nuclear development. We will talk a little bit about that. But he is critical to this new idea of the Red Scare, which he is going to push. There are many historians who actually argue that the Red Scare comes about because Truman is worried that we are going to return to isolationism, and he needs an enemy for the United States to fight that is going to convince the people that if we aren't involved in the world, there is an existential threat to us. That's going to be communism. And it's made very easy by the fact that Stalin is paranoid, Stalin is aggressive. After 1948, when the Berlin blockade, when like kind of the collapse of any semblance of like kind of unity between the Western powers and the Soviet Union. After 1949, when the Soviets developed their own atomic bomb, the Joe-1, which is going to terrify the American people, there is a real sense that the United States has to be involved in the world in order to stop the Soviet Union from taking over, in order to stop communism. And so this is going to lead to two interlinked key terms, containment and rollback. These are two that you can absolutely talk about in relation to each other. Again, we touched on this a little bit yesterday, but I want to just run through them a little bit more for you guys. The first here is containment. This is Truman's idea. So this is the one that's coming about in 1946, 1947, 1948, and is really going to last until the early 1950s when Eisenhower takes over. In this, it is the idea that yes, communism is expansionist. Yes, it is going to try and overthrow the European powers. It is going to try and overthrow the United States if it gets the opportunity to do so. But it can be contained. And so we're just going to stop it from going any further. We're going to leave it in the places where it already is. And the only thing that we really need to do is to like keep it penned in, essentially. To do that, we're going to use all of the forces that we have at our disposal. So we're going to use our economic, diplomatic, and military power in order to prevent that spread. And it's going to show up in places like the Marshall Plan, which is the economic rebuilding of Europe, but it's also going to show up in Korea, where we are going to send troops under the like kind of the leadership of the United Nations as a mission to try and prevent the communist takeover of the Korean Peninsula. That is going to work very, very well right up until China gets involved and pushes back American and Allied troops all the way back to the 36th parallel, which is where there is now the border between North and South Korea. That is going to be the line that the ceasefire agrees to at the end of the Korean War. And the sense amongst many Americans is that containment is not quite good enough for preventing communism from spreading, particularly because Korea has not been the big success that was hoped for. And that is going to lead in large part to Eisenhower, when he is running for president against Truman, running on a platform that that Truman is too soft on communism. Despite the Red Scare at home, despite the massive crackdowns on suspected communist agents domestically, and despite the Korean War, Eisenhower says that that Truman is weak, that he is too soft on communism, and that's going to lead to a second key term. So our second key term is rollback. This is Eisenhower's plan. So containment, containing it, keeping it from spreading, that's Truman's plan. Rollback, Eisenhower's idea. Not just keeping it in place, pushing it back. We've got to be intervening to throw the communists out. And we've got to do that everywhere in the world. We're not just concerned about Europe now. We're not just concerned about like kind of bits of Asia. Anywhere that we're needed to, we need to intervene. So that's going to mean South America. It's going to mean Africa. It's going to mean Southeast Asia. All of these are areas that Eisenhower is massively concerned about. And you're going to see a ramping up of CIA power and CIA plans to overthrow regimes that we don't like. Places like Guatemala, places like Iran, where left-wing democratic regimes that look a little bit too close to communism, that really aren't, but look like they could be. Nationalist uprisings, things like that, those are all going to be seen with real suspicion by Eisenhower, and we're going to try and push back against that. Now, as it says on this slide, this is going to mean ignoring Westphalian sovereignty. This is absolutely a violation of that, but that is going to go away during the Cold War era as a real concern, because the main thing that we need to do is prevent communism from spreading, and if it does spread, push it back, throw it out, get rid of it. That is the idea of rollback. So you can see that like kind of rollback is really an extension of containment, but it is a step further along than Truman was keen to do. One of the key texts here about this is John Lewis Gaddis. He is a realist thinker. He wrote a book called Strategies of Containment. He argues that Truman was heading in this way anyway, but that Eisenhower basically kind of led to a much greater escalation of the Cold War through his ideas. John Lewis Gaddis is going to be the guy to read if you want a view that the way that the United States acted in the Cold War was correct because communism was such a big threat. But because of our desire to roll back communism, and that is really going to be our policy going forward for most presidents, you're going to see greater interventions throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. This is going to lead to things like the Bay of Pigs disaster under Kennedy. It's going to lead to Vietnam under Johnson and Nixon. It is going to lead to basically us funding anyone, anywhere who is resistant to communism, even if those are deeply immoral regimes, even if those are regimes that that punish their own citizens, that are deeply dictatorial, that are totalitarian. If they are anti-communist, they are on our side. This is going to lead us all the way to the end of the Cold War. This is Winds of Change, which I'm not going to play in its entirety in this video, but I recommend that you guys go and watch on YouTube. It's Winds of Change. It's a music video, and it's about the hope of the end of the Cold War. But ultimately, the Cold War is going to end between 1989 and 1991. 1991 is kind of like the point that we say it's definitely over, but from 1989 onwards, it's really starting to fall apart, and it becomes very clear that we are winning. At the same time, no one foresees the end of the Cold War. No theorist, no politician really expects the Soviet Union to collapse in the way that it does. I'm going to end this here because globalization is something that we're going to talk about in the future. It's going to be something that we talk about in terms of both economic and cultural globalization. And so I don't feel the need to talk about this too much right now. But the key thing that I hope you've taken away from this is the difference between containment and rollback, where they fit into the broader Cold War ideology that emerges about the importance of stopping communism, that communism is inherently expansionist and is a threat to the United States. If you do have more questions about this, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And going forward, I will hopefully only be using this if, again, we get a really problematic timing disaster where I make the mistake of not factoring in how long I'm going to spend talking about Venezuela into my lesson planning. But when we pick back up on Monday, we're going to be talking about realism, and hopefully you now have a little bit of a picture of, at least up until the 1990s, what American foreign policy looks like. Everything after that, I promise you, we are going to touch on in future classes. So we are going to talk about the post-war on terror era. We are going to talk about the modern day. So all of that is going to come, but this is just your kind of 15 minutes, 16 minutes of context about the Cold War, containment, rollback, and hopefully you now know how to answer those key terms.